Forgive me if this is trite at this point, given the amount of pride nostalgia on this side of the internet. From real Irishman Napoleon Bonaparte's Pride retrospective videos, to Forrest Soa's documentary on how we changed the world of fighting. But nonetheless, the Gracie Hunter is a generational icon in Japanese MMA. Weighing maybe 170 to 180 pounds soaking wet, Saku went out into the ring with the body of a guy who thinks that doing 10 push-ups, drinking a 6-pack of Coors Light, and smoking a pack a day is physical conditioning, which is coincidentally exactly what his routine was. Unassuming and often looking like he was zoning out in the middle of a fistfight, Sakuraba was a perfect combination of Japanese Bushido bullshit and a DS Brother-esque playful detachment. For those who are big wrestling fans but haven't seen his shoot fights, I highly recommend his MMA bout with Carlos Newton. The two made a gentleman's agreement to do minimal striking and instead just grapple, and the result is an amazing series of scrambles that ends with Sakuraba getting the W. It's very pancrase coded, and I think that anyone who enjoys mat work would love it, but I digress. As much as I adore him as a shoot fighter, however, something I think is often overlooked is the original vocation of the IQ wrestler. None other than being a top-tier shoot stylist, as the name implies. There's a really weird little paradox in his fan perception, in my opinion, as he's most well known by MMA fans for being, on paper, a comically outmatched professional wrestler who is still able to kick ass, and seemingly most known by contemporary pro-res fans as that guy who did MMA and who has since been a part-timer for the past few decades. Of course, the real ones still remember his earlier work, but it's an unfortunate side effect of his MMA greatness, as by the Pride era onwards, shoot fighting had become his primary focus. He spent his prime athletic years, if you can call a man with that level of physical preparation in his prime, slaying giants in Sakakibara's professional fisting extravaganza, and thus we likely lost out on some great wrestling, which is a trade-off I'm more than happy to have occurred nonetheless. Sakuraba's background is an incredibly common one for 90s Yukai alumni, growing up as a huge fan of professional wrestling, and in his case New Japan, and the work of noted furry Satoru Sayama, a man who could be generously described as half Antonio Inoki, half Hideki Tojo. It's an interesting parallel, as the original Tiger Mask could fight incredibly grounded, brutal shoot-style matches, all the while retaining his high-flying repertoire. And oh yeah, he's dressed as a tiger. Even if he didn't work a high-flying cruiserweight style, Sakuraba may have internalized this dissonant dichotomy in his later pro wrestling work by becoming a top-tier shooter with a silly slacker demeanor, though of course his persona is more akin to a face variation of the cold dispassion seen in contemporary shooter heels. All of this naturally led to him pursuing amateur wrestling in school, placing fourth in the All Japan Collegiate Championships in his senior year. Even though he could have pursued a coaching career or even the Olympics given that he defeated some future medalists, he followed his passion, which led him to the UWFI dojo, though interestingly he would later consider joining Pancrase as well. Nominally, Takada and Yoji Anjo were his primary coaches, but given their combined MMA records of 6 wins, 11 losses, and 3 draws, one might attribute his later shoot fighting success more to Saku's exceptional personal talent and his tutelage under Billy Robinson. He would train alongside men like Rings legend Kiyoshi Tamura and the mountain troll of Japanese folklore Yoshihiro Takayama. As I stated in my Tamura video, there were actually some really exceptional striking coaches available in this dojo, which was a rarity in that era of pro-res, and resulted in Tamura being such a polished striker. This is true of Saku as well, albeit to a lesser extent. In both pro-res and shoot fighting, he has sneakily good kicks and a really crafty tie stance he throws knees out of, a special tool that will help us later. His punching was less than ideal, but it made him the scrappy freak that we know and love today, often throwing in combination, even if said combos are completely schizophrenic. He's a weird motherfucker and a Gracie Hunter. Aided by returning guest Control of Kick Submission Suplex and Andos, starting off in UWFI, this is the Kazushi Sakuraba 5-match primer. Koji Kanemoto is an underrated favorite of mine, as both a great shoot wrestler and someone who could work the 90s cruiserweight style. If you're a shoot style freak like I am, and you're watching this video, so don't lie to yourself, I'd highly recommend his later match with Bas Rutten, which is absolutely great. Koji is an expressive action fighter, and young Sakuraba finds himself pitted against him in UWFI, the original home of Takada-ism alongside Kingdom before we would get uncut black tar Takada in Hustle. Before the match begins, we get interviews with Kanemoto and Sakuraba. I have no idea what either man is saying. If you speak Japanese, please feel free to tell me. But their general tone and mannerisms, seen in both talking head segments and the entrances, clearly establish the alignments of each man. Koji is dispassionate and dickish, whereas Sakuraba is earnest and anxious, giving a little smile and laugh amidst one of his answers. As the match begins, we see that Sakuraba already has a distinct style, despite not yet being the IQ wrestler, throwing prodding kicks before shooting the low single, a signature takedown of his in shoot fights, but gets rebuffed by Koji, who throws spinning shit that backs him off.
We're throwing spinning shit now? And
trying again, Koji applies an arm-in guillotine, blasting him with knees before the determined Saku finally gets him to the ground. It's evident that Sakuraba might be the sharper grappler, but Koji is meaner and scrappy, giving him counters where none could be derived by technique alone. Sakuraba attempts to work the leg from above, but gets swept into a knee bar, only countering with a mean toe hold and knee bar of his own, but he gets broken up by Koji, who blasts him with kicks and stomps. He works for some sub-attempts of his own, going through a series of leg locks and crab variations, until Koji once again escapes and stomps the fuck out of him. For only being a few years in his career, Sakuraba's arsenal of holds and fluidity in going between them is incredibly well developed, looking every bit the prodigy we know him to be. Kanemoto tries to return the favor in lower body destruction, but is reversed and has to go for a rope break, the first of the match. Sakuraba tries to blast him with a kick, but Kanemoto raises his leg to check, throwing some Volcon Waffle House parking lot style open-handed combos, following it up with a beautiful judo throw, a specialty of his. Saku forces a scramble, but Koji counters it well, maintaining the ride before pulling him backwards into a pretty gnarly choke attempt. Saku just about manages to survive, so instead Koji rolls for the Minoru Suzuki / Tony Ferguson rolling armbar, and exactly like Misu, chaining it into a leg attack when it fails. The two dance and spin for submissions until Sakuraba is now forced to go for the ropes and they break. On the feet, we get the first of several fucked up bumps as a very basic slam by Koji turns into a facebuster, barely escaping an ensuing armbar. Anyone who thinks that shoot style is always low impact is proven incredibly wrong in my opinion, as the UWFI in-house style had more high impact moves than some other promotions, with a little more pro wrestling that isn't relying on solely grapple fuckery, though of course, I welcome said grapple fuckery. Sakuraba returns the favor with a crunching head drop German suplex and an armbar attempt. Koji counters with some great leg work, but eventually Sakuraba gets the sweep, and we get the first appearance of his dreaded Kimura or double wrist lock, which Kanemoto is able to counter in a hammerlock, something I've never seen before. The two once again whirl around hold for hold before Sakuraba tries to get the finish, screaming as he cranks a chin lock before blasting strikes to the head. Getting wild proves to be his undoing, however, as that's Kanemoto's game. Koji gets him with a tiger suplex, then a judo throw straight into an armbar that cinches the victory. This is meat and potatoes honest-to-goodness wrestling, a little morality tale that happens to have shoot style as its core. I think it's particularly interesting due to the fact that it has a hard heel-face alignment dichotomy, something not always seen in shoot style. Young Saku looks damn good, and he's just getting started. 3.5 stars. The following entry was written by Control of Kick Submission Suplex. Please subscribe to his channel if you haven't already, the link will be in the description. A lot of the footage from this video was sourced from his channel. By 1996, Kazushi Sakuraba, although still on the younger side, was coming into his own as a wrestler. No longer wearing the customary black trunks of the Japanese dojo trainees, Sakuraba had transitioned into his trademark brilliant orange gear. He was showing much promise as a highly technical grappler, and his speed and awareness in the ring were hard to miss. He had similarities to another grappling genius in UWFI, none other than Kiyoshi Tamura. While Sakuraba wasn't advancing up the card as much as one would have hoped by this point, his talent spoke for itself, and UWFI booked him in a trilogy against Kiyoshi Tamura during the stretch of March to May 1996. To this day, these matches are considered hidden gems among shoot style and pro-res enthusiasts in general. Tamura defeated Sakuraba in the first two matches, which were notable for their highly technical grappling and the speed at which both wrestlers moved. Shoot style was rapidly evolving in the mid-90s, with the rise of MMA and Ballet Tudo forcing wrestlers to become faster, stronger, and more magisterial. Pancrase in rings in particular encouraged a brand of hyper-realism that was both believable and exciting. The third and final match between Sakuraba and Tamura occurred on May 27, 1996, during the UWFI vs. War event at Nippon Budokan. Although only the opening match, it was arguably the best match of the evening. Sakuraba and Tamura provided fans a futuristic glimpse of shoot styles present and future. It was a masterclass in hyper-realism, with both wrestlers pushing each other and committing to a best-in-class grappling and sports psychology. The match was layered with subtle notes of positioning, counter-positioning, defense, counter-offense, and anything you can think of if you're familiar with combat sports. This may seem exaggerated, but any careful viewer will note the ways in which both Sakuraba and Tamura respond to each other, and how they continually push each other on the mat. The audience's silence reinforces this, as they are absolutely absorbed in the technical clinic happening before their eyes. It should be noted that Sakuraba and Tamura were very familiar with each other from their time in the UWFI dojo, and both learned all they could from Billy Robinson. In fact, according to stories in the Japanese press a few years later, Tamura and Sakuraba despised each other. Whatever malice they had for each other was channeled into both continually trying to demonstrate their superior skill in the ring. It's a story of two dojo rivals executing what they know best and not giving an inch until one of them combines their knowledge with something a little extra. Both wrestlers only exhaust one rope break during the match, although Tamura probably exerts more control over the match, as he seems to manipulate Sakuraba's defense a bit more than the latter would have wished. At one point, Tamura uses Sakuraba's momentum from a key lock attempt from underneath to establish side control, and Sakuraba lets out an audible point of exasperation. Tamura is just better at this point, and he's determined to make this trilogy a sweep. Sakuraba appears to run out of ideas but still looks game. Finally, after an upper body engagement, Tamura surprises the audience and his opponent with a beautiful flying armbar. Sakuraba is in no man's land and eventually taps. If you're a patient viewer with a keen eye and knowledge of grappling, this is perhaps one of the best sub 10-minute matches you will ever see as a pro wrestling fan. It is the art of the sport in its purest form. It's nothing but the basics. In a way, it's a hyper-realistic version of Lou Thesz versus Vern Gagne. Whereas Gagne and Thesz battled each other with their preferred methods and holds, Sakuraba and Tamura engaged in beautiful combat using everything they learned from each other and their dojo instructors. Sakuraba has to go back to the drawing board, but he will get better because of this experience. He is destined to become the IQ wrestler, the Gracie hunter, and one of the most important individuals in MMA history. He becomes those things not by pure luck, but by becoming one of the most brilliant catch wrestlers of all time. The trilogy he has with Kiyoshi Tamura sets the foundation for this evolution. As for Tamura, he takes off his boots and kick pads in the ring and tosses them into the audience. It is farewell from UWFI, and he would join rings a few months later to pursue his own destiny of becoming one of the great shoot-style wrestlers of all time. He would find his own success in MMA as well through his own genius as a catch wrestler, defeating the likes of Pat Miletich, Jeremy Horn, Renzo Gracie, and taking Frank Shamrock to a draw over the next several years. It's not a 30-minute bomb fest, but it's a 90s classic nonetheless, and I will make this case until I go to my grave. Control's rating, 4.5 stars. Squill's rating, 4.25 stars. Fast forwarding a year, and UWFI has collapsed, as many a Yukai promotion was wont to do. It is said that whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. But this is Takada's kingdom, and thus in the realm of a mad deity, Sakuraba must resort to brutal measures. Across from him, and forgive my pronunciation, is Hiomitsu Kanehara, a sort of shoot wrestling cryptid whose career fizzled out despite an excellent rookie campaign in 1992. Later in the 90s, he would do some great work in rings, and as it transitioned into a shoot promotion, he would pick up some respectable wins over the likes of UFC veteran Jeremy Horn, as aforementioned, Uberim's brother, and noted Dutch criminal Dick Vroo. A prodigious striker, Kanehara is here to throw hands, which will complement the mat work of Sakuraba. As a note, I found it online that some people think this fight is a shoot, a full-on MMA bout as opposed to pro res. I think this comes from either unfamiliarity with Kingdom, or the fact that both wrestlers are wearing MMA gloves. But I'm like 95% sure this is merely quite hard-hitting pro wrestling. There aren't really any traditional spots, mostly incredibly brutal striking exchanges and flow roll. So I think this may be a ring situation where a finish was called ahead of time, but everything else was to be decided in the ring via improvisation. The takedowns especially looked incredibly real as each man had to fight to finish them. Unlike normal pro wrestling takedowns where someone just sort of nicely lays down as soon as his leg is grabbed. Even in regular shoot style, you see guys put up very little resistance before going down so that they can get to the juicy mat work stuff. A secondary theory on this match could be that it's basically an inverse pancrase fight. As I've said in my Minoru Suzuki vs Masakatsu Funaki video, in the early days before things got to be unadulterated shoots all of the time, the Pancrase boys would often work the opening minutes and then go all out to try and actually win. These two guys may be actually trying to take each other's heads off, akin to hard sparring, until it's time to go home. It would not surprise me in the least if that's something Takada decided was a good idea, but I digress. Takada, ever the showman, has some great production on this show, even if it's not as high budget as other promotions. We get to see each man in the back before making their entrance, and the lighting really gives it an underground fight club vibe, with only the ring lit well, almost reminding me of the production on Mike Perry's surrealist Kumite promotion, Dirty Boxing. Kanehara immediately takes space and backs Saka into a corner, and a double takes things down. Something that makes it feel very shooty is how Kanehara doesn't simply surrender bottom position and allow his opponent to work through submissions on top of him, instead playing guard in order to get back up. The grappling is beautiful and frenetic as we properly go to the ground, Saku sprawling and Kanehara responding in turn, pulling guard, and even hitting a dummy sweep before trying the armbar again. A really interesting dynamic is created, where Sakuraba is clearly better in the amateur/freestyle sense of wrestling, whereas Kanehara pulls guard and works for sweeps and subs from bottom, instead of making things worse for himself by stubbornly trying to stay upright when the battle is clearly lost. Sakuraba too has a distinct style he's developed, and whenever he ends up on his back, he quickly scrambles up via use of his double wrist lock, often rolling halfway through the stand-up in order to sweep. The striking in this match has to be highlighted, as it's snug to say the least and just amazing to watch. They're throwing punches that look great because they're not all worked, and Kanehara in particular does some awesome clinch offense to show off his Muay Thai pedigree, creating the dynamic we've become accustomed to where Sakuraba has a striking disadvantage. The first knockdown Kanehara lands in particular is great, as he grabs a collar tie with his left hand and then sends the right down the pipe to smash Sakuraba in the head. Moments like this make the match feel dangerous, as if Kanehara is truly trying to emulate a Barry Bonds at-bat with his opponent's skull. Sakuraba is of course prodigious, as one would expect, attacking his beloved knee bars and double wrist locks wherever they may appear. Sakuraba is plucky and opportunistic, his quiet and understated presence giving him the everyman appeal you also find in his fights. The finish once again proves the grappling dominance of the IQ wrestler, as Kanehara pulls Gilly out of desperation before finally being finished via armbar. This is a fun match that truly feels like it is, quote, in pursuit of real, as my compatriot Andos might put it. A great match if you want your shoot style to feel as close to MMA as possible. 4 stars.
The Tokyo Dome. No location on Earth has quite the intersection of history through martial arts and pro wrestling quite like it. The spirit of pro wrestling runs through it via the New Japan January 4th show that would become what we know as Wrestle Kingdom, and the spirit of martial arts, the home of Pride FC's biggest shows that would draw at most over 67,000 fans. Said show being the semifinals and finals of the 2003 Pride Middleweight Grand Prix tournament. But where this commonality of pro wrestling and martial arts would exist is Kazushi Sakuraba. Sakuraba being a man who idolized pro wrestlers like Tiger Mask and got his start in the UWFI as student of Chili Con Carney and Slayer of White Boys, Nobuhiko Takada. Sakuraba's style in his fights were defined by unorthodox pro wrestling moves that would feel bizarre in any other MMA context to bewilder and flummox his opponents, being exceptionally charismatic and lighthearted with the way his goofy entrances and mannerisms in fights would define his career. But it's within that adherence and love for pro wrestling that would see him cement his legacy in the Tokyo Dome as a cultural icon in the eyes of Japanese martial arts fans, defeating Royce Gracie after more than an hour of fighting and bringing an end to the Gracie's reign of dominance over the sport. Fellow video essayist Forrest Sova has a much deeper dive on the subject and its cultural significance and place in history, but for the purposes of this match, it's important to have an understanding of Sakuraba's background in pro wrestling on top of his shoot background that, in actual pro wrestling bouts, he displays himself as an invading shooter excellently, where he excels in being able to tell a compelling story in the ring within the confines of pro wrestling. And no match best demonstrates that by helping cement another man's legacy in the same building that he claimed his. Within the Tokyo Dome, against the man who would be king of strong style, Shinsuke Nakamura. I love how this match translates its dynamics even before either man locks up. Sakuraba is all business, meeting Shinsuke in the middle of the ring, offering the handshake, getting into a fighting stance, whereas Shinsuke is the exact opposite in his approach. As seen by the way he seemingly spits into his hand before he shakes Sakuraba's hand, to the way he struts about the ring with his hands down, informs us of so much character between the two. We see Sakuraba as serious and no-nonsense, treating this as a legitimate bout, and Nakamura as a legitimate competitor as he shows respect to Nakamura. Where in Nakamura, we see as lackadaisical and hesitant. One could see this as disrespect to the legendary shooter on the surface, but it also hints at a strategy of Nakamura trying to get into his opponent's head to catch him off guard with his off-kilter mannerisms. And we see more of this as Sakuraba takes Shinsuke to the ground. Shinsuke just kinda sits there as the ref forces the rope break as an attempt to frustrate Sakuraba. But on the mat, Sakuraba completely devours Shinsuke, stuffing takedowns and picking Shinsuke's leg to keep control on the mat, smothering him without any attempts to escape. Transitioning from guard to guard, telling the story of how much Sakuraba completely outclasses Shinsuke when it comes to grappling. And Shinsuke knows this. After following a stiff rope break, where the ref has to physically peel both men away from each other, Shinsuke bails to the outside, switching strategies in real time as he relies more on his striking ability, utilizing his long legs to attempt knees and kicks. But he's still not taking Sakuraba seriously as he presses him in the corner and signs his own death warrant by slapping Sakuraba in the face, preening and goading in front of Sakuraba as he does so, thus activating the greatest switch flip in the history of wrestling, with the most subtle of facial features, tells us, and Shinsuke himself, but 5 simple words. Oh, so it's like that. What follows is some of the most startling displays of violence I have ever beheld in wrestling, as Sakuraba lights Shinsuke up like it's Christmas morning with what can be casually described as a Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite in real life, where any attempt to fire back from Shinsuke might as well be throwing flower petals at a tank, as one solid kick sends Nakamura to the mat, where Nakamura makes some vain attempt to get Sakuraba into his guard, and hey, Had this been any other opponent, maybe a sound strategy, but not against the guy who invented the counter to it. Sakuraba has an answer for everything Shinsuke does. Everything from German suplexes to signature knee in the corner are all reversed and answered with several submissions, as if Sakuraba is informing Shinsuke that if he really wanted a fight, he's going to give him a murder instead. And for Shinsuke's part, makes all of what he attempts feel like trying to survive a slasher villain, as everything Shinsuke tries has this doomed urgency to it that it doesn't matter if it's a sound strategy in the long term, as long as it hits, it buys him precious time. It all works in synergy for the story being told, not only making Sakuraba look like an absolute killer in control, living up to every bit the legend Sakuraba has built for himself, but also lays sympathy at Shinsuke as he attempts in vain to turn the tide against such an irresistible force. This urgency leading to Shinsuke rushing in for a takedown, only for it to happen. Forever immortalized in my head as the Sakuraba knee is one of my favorite spots of all time. A lightning bolt of sudden violence so quick and so brutal in its unmitigated precision that I could watch it at least 100 times and still feel the primal lizard part of my brain howl in delight. But it's not just important as a visual and a spot, but also as a final punishment for Shinsuke. He's been cocky and unserious most of the match, that it took getting his face deflated like a volleyball and legitimately getting knocked out to realize that he's in waters too deep for his own good. Had this match ended at the knee, I still think it would have been perfect as a story of one man throwing rocks at God, only for his hubris to be met with divine intervention. But this is New Japan Pro Wrestling. And before the Cathedral of Antonio Inoki, even if Nakamura can land just one good shot at the right time and the right place and keep going, that is what we call fighting spirit. The Bumbaye Nakamura delivers, hits flush on Sakuraba, and it's all he needs. It rocks Sakuraba enough that it makes him take Nakamura seriously enough to try and end this match as definitively as possible, most notably in the Kimura lock. It is not just that the Kimura lock is a deadly submission or that it's Sakuraba's go-to submission, but is the lineage within it as a symbol of Japanese pride within martial arts that transforms this match into something more. Masahiko Kimura, a martial artist and pro wrestler before him, used it to defeat Helio Gracie, as Sakuraba did nearly 50 years later against Helio Gracie's son, Royce Gracie. Because of this, its application is not just to defeat Shinsuke, but to prove MMA's dominance over pro wrestling as more of a spiritual victory. And because of this, for Shinsuke, his fight stops being just against Sakuraba or just an accomplished fighter, but to fight for the honor of pro wrestling against MMA. In the hollow grounds of Antonio Inoki, he must become the king of strong style. As Shinsuke survives Sakuraba's submission attempts, he wastes no time going for a quick knee and one final Bombaye to sneak out a definitive victory over Kazushi Sakuraba. In 11 minutes and 12 seconds, like Shinya Hashimoto and Hiroshi Tanahashi before him, Shinsuke Nakamura bests the scourge of the shooters in Kazushi Sakuraba. As it is written, so it shall be. I'm not gonna lie, this is one of those matches where it felt genuinely daunting to write about. Not because I didn't have anything to say initially, but because I had to restrain myself for not adding another 20 minutes worth of material. Easily one of my favorite New Japan and, by extension, wrestling matches of all time, based purely upon how efficient and meaningful it is in execution. With a little more than a third of what the traditional main event epic does, Shinsuke and Sakuraba cut all the fat and make every maneuver, every strike, and every submission have so much weight and power behind it. To make it feel like a genuine super fight, Shinsuke's mannerisms and actions are so to where it tells the story of a man who doesn't realize the waters he's about to sink to, only to take the match more and more seriously. If it just means one well-placed knee, also gives way to how dangerous Sakuraba is. The way he drowns before Sakuraba strikes, the uselessness of Shinsuke's counterattack to infer a level of inexperience between the two, all make Sakuraba this dangerous obstacle that endears Shinsuke's struggle to the audience all the more palpable. Sakuraba, for his part, carries so much aura with him. He holds himself as this professional, but you can feel the sleeping giant within, as said professional demeanor gives way to a violent warrior at such a swift drop of the hat that it's legitimately terrifying. All his strikes and submissions land with such lethal precision that you believe each one could knock Nakamura out. And he legitimately does with that one horrifying knee. But he also protects his character so well by outmaneuvering Shinsuke's offense at every turn that forced Nakamura to think on the fly and solve Sakuraba like the world's deadliest puzzle. Which is why I enjoy the finish a lot. I can see how Sakuraba kicking out at 3 can feel like it diminishes Shinsuke's victory, but it's because Sakuraba had spent so much of the match being superior in every way to Shinsuke that establishing a backdoor where Nakamura's Bombaye is the only move that can keep Sakuraba down enough to sneak a victory with how precise it is feels logical. That puts over not just how focused and urgent Nakamura is when the shit gets real, but also how Sakuraba, under any normal circumstance, had Nakamura's number. But due to the rules of pro wrestling and inability to capitalize when the moment presented itself, led more to Shinsuke closing the gap on him, which leads to why this match is so magical in the first place. The invading shooter versus valiant ace or Inokiism match type will always hold a special place in my heart, because to face such a force that, by all rights, should crush you like an aluminum can, but slowly and defiantly picking your moments to find and create cracks in the armor that only if for a brief window of time, 3 seconds to be exact, proves that legends and monsters are but mortals. Kazushi Sakuraba, despite all his skill, was just another example of that. And for Shinsuke Nakamura, before the thousands of the Tokyo Dome, proved that pro wrestling, once again, is the strongest.
Welcome back, one and all, to yet another match at one of Josh Barnett's Bloodsport shows, this one being the absolutely awesome Bushido edition, a card which I would recommend viewing in full as the main event was one of my favorite matches of 2024. Old man Sakuraba spent the last decade or so by winding down his New Japan run as a tag worker, often with Chaos or other shooters, before hopping to Pro Wrestling Noah where he became a full part-timer. Calling upon the power invested in him by God in anime, Barnett has summoned the IQ wrestler to fight Santino Marella. Far from just a comedy wrestler in the Fed, Marella is a damn good shoot wrestler who 4-time ran the Canadian Battle Arts Dojo. For more information on that school and his partnership running it with Yuki Ishikawa, check out my interview with the legend from last year. While he's typically a bit playful and snarky, in this match Sakuraba is a straight up dick, and that match is all the better for it. Marella is rocking a singlet for the occasion, Saku his jersey rash guard and scramble shorts. I love this look from Sakuraba in his later career because it gets over that he's not necessarily taking this all that seriously. For most, looking checked out would be a hindrance, but for Saku, that's part of his gimmick. He looks like this even when he's about to face Vanderlei Silva. After the gingerly old man tie-up, Marella hits a beautiful fireman's carry to take things to the ground. Santino cheekily attacking Kimura before the IQ wrestler re-guards. Unfortunately for Saku, his guard is not all that, and Marella is able to pass and chain attacks, once again going for the Kimura and also looking for an armbar, before finally the Japanese wrestler bails himself out by rolling for a leg. This is old man grappling at its finest, measured, articulate, like a human chess match if both men have had multiple knee replacements. Continuing to do amateur wrestling moves that someone like myself dreams of hitting in a shoot, Marella gets the Russian tie and trips Sakuraba, rolling him backwards. After spending some time in side control, Sakuraba performs the first of legal but dickish moves, just rolling onto the floor and hopping onto the back of Marella. who has to spring up into a fireman's carry in order to slam and counter his way out of getting choked. The two continue to go back and forth, Marella demonstrating exemplary textbook top control, and Sakuraba getting opportunistic where he can. Things get properly serious after Marella cranks the fuck out of Sakuraba's neck, and Saku begins talking shit as they roll out of the ring in a leg entanglement. This finally gets Saku animated, and we really start to see his personality shine through, smiling and continuing the jaw jack. A scarfold strangle almost seals it, before Sakuraba cranks the fuck out of his leg in a move very similar to something Volkan pulls out from bottom half guard on occasion. As they start to get up, Sakuraba blasts him with his signature knee and tries to put him away with a choke, like how Fluffy slimed out Roman Doladize, finally adding in striking. The culmination of his assholery is when Saku pulls out the dreaded Cobra, basically telling Santino that he's a comedy wrestler and that he can go fuck himself. Sakuraba does not believe that he belongs in the ring with him, and even if he does get punished for his opponent by clowning on him, he will make up for it by out-wrestling him. From here they play the hits, and Sakuraba gets the win via Kimura, holding it in way too long. I really like the match because of the versatility both show, and Sakuraba is just such a fun shooter heel in the vein of those who came before him. 3 3/4 stars. While intermittent due to his fighting career, hopefully this video has convinced you of the pro-res prowess of Sakuraba, a generational talent from an era of Japanese wrestling that seemed to produce them in droves. We're very much at the tail end of his in-ring career, and I imagine we'll keep seeing him wrestle 1 or 2 times a year until eventually his lungs give out from being 110% nicotine by volume, and he goes up to the big cigarette carton in the sky. That, however, will be in the year 2050, as he'll have unexpectedly learned the secrets of longevity from Fujiwara. He's also busy coaching his son Taisei in Ryzen, who is now 3-2 despite Ryzen's attempts to get him murdered by guys far more experienced than him. Definitely check out those fights if you want to see some vintage catch wrestling and MMA from El Hijo del Saku, and also Ryzen in general. It's great. Sakigabara, if you're watching this, give me a sponsorship. Sakuraba is one of the most important Japanese combat athletes ever, if not globally, and I feel personally lucky to have as much of his career available to view for free online, from sources like the aforementioned Kick Submission Suplex channel. I think what I love most about him as an athlete is how he ostensibly does the same thing whether work or shoot. He has his spots he's going to get in, and will do so even if you are actively trying to knock him out. Be he across the ring from the King of Strong Style or Mirko fucking Crow Cop, he faces the challenge the same. He is stoicism incarnate, and one of the best to ever do it. Fuck the Gracies.